last video, I did a brief explanation in terms of the difference between LLMs and the future of AI, as in AGI and ASI. And to my surprise, there were some people, both here on YouTube and my other social media, such as Medium and LinkedIn, where they expressed that they were not aware of those differences. And I honestly thought this was common knowledge, but apparently not. And then I think last week, Apple even published a paper where they did explain it. And that is also when I saw that most of people in the masses were quite surprised by it. But if you've been in this space for many years and you've done this work, this is not a surprise, but apparently it is to the many people who basically thought that LLMs are the next generation AIs who do a lot of reasoning. And so that's why I decided to do this video, to then talk about what are the areas in which then AGI will potentially be different than LLM, and then also draw a parallel with those characteristics into human brain at a physical level, which regions of the brain, as well as the electrical activities of the brain, which is the brainwaves. So let's As mentioned last week, at a first glance, LLMs such as ChatGPT seem impressive because they can generate text that seems very intelligent. They can write essays, answer questions, even do some basic reasoning. But there's a key difference in that they are not truly intelligent, as mentioned before, in the way that we humans are. LLMs are so-called narrow AI, or the first generation AI, that are designed to excel at very specific tasks like language processing. They work by recognizing patterns, for example, from massive huge data sets, and they have been trained on those massive and huge data sets, but they don't really understand the world in the way, for example, that we humans do. They cannot reason beyond their training or adapt in real time, as an example. In that, the next generation of AI, AGI or ASI, would be different because they would include characteristics such as reasoning, for example, within the AGI. For example, now, what would make the next generation AI, as in AGI, different than LLMs? While LLMs are expert in language, as mentioned, AGIs must handle a wide variety of tasks, from, for example, math to perception to a physical action, for example, and they would be able to learn new things outside of their original training domain, much like we humans do, where they can pick up new skills, new tasks, and just sort of learn as they move forward. They also need to reason and solve problems autonomously. For example, in this case, LLMs can sometimes generate solutions based on past examples, but they lack true reasoning. In this case, AGI would reason dynamically, considering multiple possibilities and outcomes like humans do, and they would also be able to solve new and unfamiliar problems. They would also be able to adapt to new experiences. For example, LLMs are quite static. Once they are trained, they do not improve or they do not adapt unless they are retrained with new data. But AGI, on the other hand, is able to have a continuous learning form like us humans do, where their knowledge evolves as they are prompted with new environments and new settings, so to speak. They also need to understand and interact with the world. LLMs, in this case, lack the perception and the ability to interact with the world, where AGI will be able to, I should say, understand the physical world and the social norms using their sensors in order to reason about different situations that they are within, and they would be able to take action based on those sensory information that they are perceiving. Lastly, they need to exhibit autonomy in that they need to be able to act autonomously within an environment, unlike the fact that LLMs are not able to act autonomously. AGIs then would be self-driven. To sum up, LLMs excel in specific task based on massive pattern recognition, but AGI would go beyond that, integrating learning, reasoning, perception, and autonomy to adapt and act intelligently across a broad range of activities like humans do. It would be far more like human intelligence, not just an expert system for one area like language, for example, within Let's LLMs. Look at one of these characteristics that would be adapted into AGI that is not currently existing within LLMs or narrow AIs for that matter. Let's take reasoning, for example. For AGI to possess reasoning like humans do, it must be able to think through problems, make decisions, and draw conclusions in a way that goes beyond pattern matching or information retrieval. It needs to be able to, for example, identify and define problems, and they would need to be able to break it down into understandable components and determine what kind of solution it's looking for. It would also need to be able to generate multiple hypotheses like humans do, where it should be able to think through several possible solutions or approaches, weigh their pros and cons, and then reason about the outcomes of each approach like we do. It also needs to apply logic. AGI needs to use formal logic and evaluate options and make decisions based on consistency and validity. It also needs to learn and adapt, where AGI's reasoning must evolve over time like we humans do as it gains more data or encounters with new situations like humans. It should be able to adjust to new strategies as well as new beliefs. And lastly, it needs to be able to handle ambiguity and uncertainty like humans do, unlike current systems within LLMs, which often fail when presented with incomplete or contradictory data. An AGI would be able to handle these ambiguities and uncertainties, making reasoned decisions even in less than perfect circumstances, exactly like human species. Now, let's look at reasoning in the human brain, because it begs the question as to if the reasoning is one of the characteristics that needs to be had within the future of AI, as in AGI and ASI, then how does the human brain do the reasoning? So the human reasoning is far more complex and subtle. It involves various regions of the brain working together, and it can be broken down into several cognitive processes that you and I go through every single moment of our daily lives without even being conscious of it. And here's how we can break them down. The way in which the human brain handles reasoning in this example is that it utilizes different regions of the brain, one of them being the prefrontal cortex, that it's the center of higher cognitive functions, including reasoning. And it's involved, for example, in planning and decision making. When we reason, our PFCs, prefrontal cortex, helps us break down problems and predict potential future outcomes. It also helps us with abstract thinking, in that it helps us and allows us to think beyond immediate sensory information, imagining future possible scenarios and imagining solving novel problems. It also helps within working memory, which is extremely important because our PFC needs to hold on to specific information during a very short amount of time in order to be able to use that data to make informed decision and reason within the complex. The other parts of and regions of the brain that are involved in reasoning are parietal cortex, temporal lobes, occipital lobe, and basal ganglia. In, for example, parietal cortex, it helps with concepts like quantity, distance, and direction. And in task, for example, when we require manipulation of objects or thinking in 3 dimensions. When it comes to temporal lobes, we also help that in, for example, memory recall or semantic knowledge. And when it comes to occipital lobe, it's mainly responsible for processing visual information, which is extremely important, and we heavily rely on that. And lastly, the basal ganglia and limbic system, they help in decision making and emotional reasoning within humans, where they influence our choices by evaluating risks, rewards, emotional responses, and much more when we are going through the reasoning at any point in time without us even being aware of it as humans. Now, what are the key differences when it comes to reasoning in terms of reasoning within humans versus reasoning within AGI? In humans, reasoning is deeply connected to emotions, past experiences, and context. We reason not just with logic, but with intuition, biases, and learned behavior. In contrast, an AGI would need to separate its reasoning from emotional biases, relying purely on logic and data, unless explicitly designed to simulate emotional reasoning. Humans also use sensory inputs such as sight, sound, touch, and embodied experience to reason through problems, while an AGI might process data in a different, more abstract form without direct physical interaction with the. In summary, if we were to design AGI that would be able to reason like humans do, they would need to reason flexibly across different tasks, adapting based on logic, learning, and past experiences, because the human brain uses these different specialized regions that mentioned earlier for reasoning, often combining logic with sensory input, emotional intelligence and responses, and memories. And that is what is the huge difference between the current AIs and the human brain. The human brain's reasoning processes are still mystery to us, obviously, but they clearly involve many interconnected regions within the brain, as mentioned earlier. For AI and AGI to be able to do that, the challenge is to recreate this in a purely artificial system, but it also is where the real potential and breakthroughs within AI lies. Hence, you can imagine how the technology now is challenging at this moment in terms of creating these AGI systems, because being able to create something that reasons like humans do, like you and I do on a daily basis in every moment in time, it's extremely challenging to actually recreate at a technological, both software as well as hardware basis. In this video, we covered the reasoning in which it happens in the human brain at the regional level of the brain. But there's also a whole slew of things that is happening at the electrical part of the brain, which is the brain waves, that we talk a lot about in this channel. So for the next and follow-up video, I want to focus on the brain waves, or the electrical activities of the brain that happens at the reasoning level within the human brain, in it to sort of combine that with the different regions of the brain that we covered today. And remember that reasoning is only one part in which the human brain characteristic would need to be added to AGI. There's also other aspects that needs to be added to the AGI, or at least designed with the next generation of AI for them to be completely or more or less function like the human brain. So reasoning is just one of them. As always, thanks so much for watching. And I also want to mention that one of you asked for Patreon. I don't have Patreon. I don't even know what it is. I have to look it up. And also some people email me directly with questions. I'm not really into social media, and I really don't have time to respond individually. But if you have questions, definitely, I always check my comments. But in the future, if there are more of you who wants to have Patreon, definitely let me know, and I can look it up and see what it is, because I've heard about it, but I really don't know what it is, and I don't know how it works. Anyways, thanks for all your comments, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.